About 2 years ago, I hit a really dark place and ended up in a youth psych ward because I wanted to end it all. Honestly, my time there was surprisingly okay. Actually, it helped me a ton. The staff were great, and the other patients were super friendly. I even made some friends in the short time I was there. Most of the patients were girls, like me, and I got really close with 3 of them, Jane, Grace, and Joy. The 4 of us would eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, and we'd hang out during free time. In that short period, we formed this tight bond that's hard to explain. We barely knew each other, and we knew we'd probably never see each other again after leaving, but there was something special about our connection. Jane, Grace, and I were in the hospital for pretty much the same reason. We were all really depressed and struggling hard. Grace mentioned she tried to end things too, and Jane hinted at the same but never went into details. Joy, though, was there for something totally different. You're not supposed to ask why people are in a place like that, but we got so close that we didn't mind sharing. Joy didn't seem like she belonged there at all. She wasn't depressed, didn't have anxiety, nothing like that. She was super outgoing, always smiling, cracking jokes, and every day seemed like a good day for her. I genuinely thought she was totally fine, which made me wonder why she was even there in the first place. One day, I asked her why she was admitted. She got really hesitant, dodging the question, never giving a straight answer. We tried to pry a bit, but she wouldn't budge. Then, one time, I jokingly asked, "What, do you want to kill people or something?" She stopped, looked me dead in the eyes, and just stared, her face completely blank. It felt like forever. Then, she nodded silently. There was something about the way she did it, cold, serious, that stuck with me. I knew she wasn't joking. But right after, she burst out laughing, saying she was just messing with me. I laughed too, but it was nervous, forced. Part of me wanted to believe she was kidding, but deep down, I knew something was off with Joy. A couple of days later, the doctors told me I was ready to be discharged. I was the first of our little group to leave, and honestly, I was sad to say goodbye to my new friends. But I was also happy to go home. I said my goodbyes, and just like we expected, I never saw them again. About 6 months after I got out, things started getting weird. I began getting these creepy, cryptic messages on my social media. Some were almost threatening. They'd come in waves, every day for a week, then nothing for months. The messages were in broken English, barely making sense. One said there was someone living in my house, hiding in my kitchen. Another claimed that when I slept, this person would float above me, watching me all night. It freaked me out, but I didn't know who was sending them. Some messages were super apologetic, while others said I'd burn in hell forever. They were disturbing, but I brushed them off as someone trying to prank me. Eventually, I stopped reading them, and they stopped coming for a while. Everything went back to normal until it didn't. I ride horses, and when one of my horses passed away, I posted a picture of her on Instagram to remember her. Not long after, I got a message that made my stomach drop. It was 2 links to a photo sharing site, and I knew it was from the same person who'd been messaging me. I clicked the first link, and it was a photo of my mom's bedroom, pulled from an online real estate listing for our house. But there was a decapitated horse head photoshopped onto the bed. The image was all distorted, tinted red, with a caption that read, "She's burning in hell, and there's nothing you could do about it." I was horrified. Whoever this was knew where I lived, and the messages were getting more threatening. I felt sick, especially since my horse had just died. Why would someone do this? There was a second link. I didn't want to click it, but I had to know. It led to an album with over 70 photos of me, some from years ago, some recent, all taken from my social media or my family's. In group photos, everyone else's faces were scratched out, leaving just mine. The album's title, my home address. I stopped using social media after that and couldn't sleep well. I felt like someone was watching me, just like the messages described. Things went quiet for a while, the longest break yet. Then, about a year later, I got another message. I'd posted a picture of my dog on Instagram, and someone commented, "Caesar sends his regards from Cessation." Caesar was my dog who died 6 years ago. My heart raced. I messaged the account, demanding to know who they were and how they knew about Caesar. The account was private, no followers, no posts. They ignored me for a bit, then sent a single photo of my bedroom. I called them out, saying they were the ones sending the messages. They admitted it and started apologizing. I promised I'd talk to them if they told me who they were. And yeah, you guessed it, it was Joy. We messaged for hours. She spilled everything. When I asked why she did it, she said she couldn't explain it. She called it the call of Satan or just the call. I remembered she mentioned that in some of the messages. She said she got this urge to do whatever the call told her to, and she couldn't stop it. She sounded so remorseful, but I couldn't wrap my head around why she'd target me like this. She even said she wanted my help, but I knew she was way beyond anything I could do. Then, before I blocked her, she dropped a bomb. I wasn't the first girl she'd done this to. I blocked her and hoped I'd never hear from her again. When I was 15, I lived in a rural area about 20 minutes outside of town. One day, I was home alone from school, upstairs in my room, when I noticed a white car pull up in front of our mailbox and just sit there. I couldn't see who was inside, but they stayed for several minutes without getting out, long enough to creep me out. Then they just drove off. We weren't super close to our neighbors, but we weren't miles apart either. I remembered one of them down the road was selling their house, so I figured it was probably a potential buyer who got the wrong address or was checking out the neighborhood. I didn't think much of it after that. About a week later, it was a Friday night, and I'd gone downtown with my boyfriend at the time, Jason, to see a movie premiere. It was a big deal for me. I'd begged my parents for weeks to push back my curfew so I could go, since the movie wouldn't end until 1 a.m., and it took 20 minutes to get home. They were hesitant, but finally agreed. After the movie, Jason and I took our time walking to his truck in the parking deck. It was a well-lit, pretty safe area, so we hung out for a bit, trying to stretch out my curfew. There weren't many cars around at that hour, but I suddenly noticed one parked right across from us, the same white car I'd seen at my house. It was running, and there was a man, maybe in his mid-30s, sitting inside alone. I might have brushed it off as a coincidence, but as I kept looking, he flipped on his bright lights, blinding us, and peeled out of the parking deck, nearly hitting Jason's truck. My guts sank. I told Jason to take me home right away. As we pulled out, we saw the car parked across the street from the theater. Lights off, the guy still inside. He didn't follow us, but I was shaken. That was the start of 3 long, terrifying years of being stalked by this guy. A couple of months after the parking deck incident, it got worse. He started showing up more often, and I hated being alone anywhere. I never knew when or where he'd pop up, and sometimes weeks or months would pass between sightings. It became clear he was watching me constantly, but he only made himself known when I was alone or with Jason, never when I was with my parents or other friends. I got so scared that I didn't tell my friends, worried they wouldn't believe me. I only confided in Jason and my family. Then one day, my friend Rachel, who lived about 5 miles away, told me about a creepy guy who showed up at her house over the weekend. Her dad was working, so she was home alone with our friend Megan. Everything was normal until dusk, when they started smelling cigarette smoke. My heart raced because by then, I'd been finding cigarette butts around my house, even though no one in my family smoked. I had a hunch it was connected to my stalker, but hadn't confirmed it. Rachel and Megan traced the smell to an open window in the back room. When Rachel went to close it, she saw a strange man on her back porch. She said he turned around with these dead, empty eyes and stared right through her like she wasn't there. Megan called the police, but Rachel was frozen, shocked, as he smirked, finished his cigarette, and calmly walked away. The police found cigarette butts on the porch and scattered in the backyard, showing he'd been there for a while, but no trace of him otherwise. When I described my stalker to Rachel, we realized it was the same guy. She hadn't seen the white car, so we figured he parked down the road and walked up her long driveway or through the woods. As time went on, I reported everything to the police, and they documented it all. They never doubted me, always showed up quickly, but they'd never even seen the guy. He was too good at disappearing. We started to suspect he had a police scanner or something, because he always seemed one step ahead. One night, almost 2 years after Rachel's incident, Jason and I came home early from a date. My parents were out, and we had a strict rule about not being home alone together, so we stayed in the driveway to talk since my dad said they were only 10 minutes away. We thought it'd be fine, but not even a minute later, we saw headlights flick on in the bushes across the street. This creep had backed his car into the bushes and waited for us to get home. Jason called the cops, and I called my dad, who was speeding home. The guy revved his engine, flashed his lights, then got out and walked toward Jason's truck. I'll never forget how slow and methodical he was, his face completely emotionless. I was sobbing, and we locked the doors. He walked right up to my side, the passenger side, and stood a couple of feet from the window, just staring at me with these black hole eyes. Jason, who played baseball, had a bat in the back seat for moments like this. He pulled me toward him, away from the window, and grabbed the bat, but the guy didn't even flinch. He glanced at the bat, flashed this gross, wide grin, then turned, walked back to his car, and drove off. It felt like forever, but it was probably only 5 minutes. My dad pulled into the driveway at 80 miles an hour just after the guy left, and the cops showed up soon after, but he was long gone. There were more incidents, dead animals left at our front door, flashlights shining into our windows at night, but no matter what we did, we couldn't catch him. My family tried everything. My older brother even chased him through the woods behind our house one night, but lost him. The police wanted to help, but all they had were my stories, Rachel's encounter, and a vague sighting of his car. We didn't even have a name to file a restraining order, not that it would have helped. The creepiest part, in 3 years, this guy never said a single word. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. No more sightings, no more cigarette butts, nothing. I don't know if he died, got arrested for something else, or just lost interest, though that seemed unlikely. It's been 10 years now, and I've never seen him again. Creeps come in all forms, and this guy was straight out of a horror movie. Something in his eyes was so evil it turned my stomach. Those 3 years were stressful and terrifying, and even now, living in a different state, I sometimes half expect him to show up. The fear lingers, but my life's mostly normal again. Earlier this year, I was browsing YouTube for creepy stories, as you do, and stumbled across a true stalker story by a female YouTuber I didn't know. My stomach dropped because her story was almost identical to mine. The cigarette butts, the dead eyes, the white car, everything. I knew it was probably the same guy. I did some digging and found out she's my age, started experiencing this when she was 15, and grew up in the next town over. I was floored. I reached out to her, but haven't heard back yet. If I do, I'll update. When I was 19, I was openly gay, but hadn't told my parents yet. A few of my friends knew, and I was planning to tell more but wasn't quite ready. My school offered a performance exchange program to the US, and my good friend Laura convinced me to join. A group of 20 of us signed up. A few days before we left, Laura threw a going-away party. We got to talking about relationships, and being a bit tipsy, we made a silly pact that each of us would try to hook up with someone during our 4-month stay in the US. Things got rowdy, and we ended up playing Truth or Dare. Someone straight up asked me if I was gay. I glanced at Laura, who gave me an encouraging nod, and with a mix of nerves and liquid courage, I said, "Yeah." Everyone cheered, hyping me up, saying they already knew and just wanted me to admit it. One of the guys, Sam, stumbled over, slung his arm around me, and slurred, "We're gonna find you a nice guy in the US." I laughed it off. For days later, we landed in a small city in Minnesota and got settled into our dorms. I was rooming with Sam. As we were unpacking, an American guy popped in, introduced himself as Noah, and said he lived next door. We hit it off and became good friends. About a month into our stay, Noah invited us to a party at his cabin by a lake. We were pumped. Back home, we were used to drinking, so we were missing it. Noah said there'd be tons of people and promised it'd be a blast. Sam, being Sam, ran after him to ask if there'd be any gay folks at the party. Noah said, yeah, there would be. We got to the cabin, music blasting, people already having a good time. Noah ran up, tossed us some beers, and told us to get drinking. The night got wild. The Americans thought it was hilarious to take shots with exchange students, and they lined up to pour us drinks. I'm not a big guy, so after 5 beers and 10 shots, I was beyond drunk. Luckily, we were all crashing at the cabin, so no one had to drive. At some point, Noah gathered everyone and shouted, "Skinny dipping." He stripped down, ran to the lake, and jumped in. We all looked at each other for a second before tearing off our clothes and following him, laughing like idiots. Sam and another guy swam over to me, throwing their arms around me awkwardly. Sam pointed out a guy named Brody and with a grin said, "He's gay too." Before I could react, Sam swam off, leaving me with Brody. We started talking, and we ended up chatting most of the night. By 7 a.m., when the party wound down, I crashed on a mattress and passed out. I woke up not long after, feeling weird. I looked down and saw Brody trying to take off my pants. My heart raced. I told him to stop, but he didn't even look at me, just kept going. I yelled at him again, but he ignored me. Panicking, I pulled myself together and kicked him hard in the crotch. He groaned, fell back, and limped away. Later that day, when everyone started waking up, Brody was gone. Some friends asked if I'd had fun with him during the night. I lied, saying I didn't see him, hoping that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I was walking to class on campus when I spotted Brody about 100 meters away, staring at me the whole time. I thought it was weird, but figured he probably went to the school. On my way to my next class, I saw him again, much closer, following me. My stomach dropped. I started walking faster, and so did he. Freaked out, I ran into a group of friends, and he backed off. I was so relieved, but didn't tell them what was going on. Later, when Sam and I were watching a movie in our dorm, he asked if I'd hurt something. I said no, and he just shrugged and went to bed. The next morning, we woke up to a disaster. Our dorm was trashed. My stuff was thrown all over the hall. My laptop and phone were gone, but Sam's things were untouched. We called campus security, who called the police. They asked me some questions, looked around, but didn't find anything. They said they'd follow up if anything turned up. That day, I went with Laura to buy a new laptop and phone. As we left the Apple store, she pointed at a guy across the street and asked if he was the one I'd flirted with at Noah's party. My blood ran cold. It was Brody. I said no and dragged her in the opposite direction. But he kept showing up outside every shop we went to. We stopped at a cafe, sat outside, and the whole time Brody stared us down from across the street. We were both freaked out and decided to talk to Noah. Back at the dorm, we asked Noah about Brody. He said he didn't know anyone by that name. We described him, but Noah shrugged and said he hadn't seen him at the party. That made it even weirder. I pulled Laura aside and told her what happened with Brody at the party, how he tried to touch me. She insisted I go to the police, especially since I had photos from that night. I agreed to go the next day. At the police station, I showed them the photos and explained how Brody had been stalking me. They already had a case open from the dorm break-in, so they took my statement and photos, saying they'd open a new case since there was no direct link yet. They promised to send 2 officers to keep an eye on our dorm for the week. That night, I woke up freezing. The window and door were wide open, and my blanket was gone. I asked Sam if he was pranking me, but he said no. We closed everything up, and he gave me one of his blankets. The next morning, the window and door were open again, and my blanket was in the hallway. We closed everything and went to class. In the middle of class, an undercover officer pulled me out and took me to an unmarked car. He explained that they'd spotted Brody near the dorm. One officer chased him, but he ran into the forest and got away. The officer who stayed made sure I was safe. They let me go after talking it over, and for a while, things seemed quiet. I still looked over my shoulder, scared Brody would pop up, but nothing happened for a bit. That evening, I was chilling in my dorm, listening to indie rock and browsing the web around 11 p.m. I put my laptop down and tried to sleep, but I kept hearing noises, a creak, maybe a breath in the corner. It took forever to fall asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up unable to breathe. I opened my eyes and saw Brody's blood-red eyes staring into mine, his hands around my neck trying to choke me. I fought, but he was ready, pinning me down. Just as I was about to pass out, someone yelled, "Let go of him." Brody didn't stop, but then I heard a pop and he collapsed. The police had tossed him. The next day, The cops told me Brody confessed to everything, stealing my laptop and phone, trashing my stuff, breaking into the dorm. He said he did it because he was mad I didn't let him have fun with me at the party. They found my stuff in a small camp he'd set up a few miles into the woods near the college, where it looked like he'd been living for a while. I still don't know how he knew about the party or got there, but man, that was a close call. Back in December 2012, I joined the Navy. By March 2014, I moved from one technical school in Great Lakes to another in Virginia Beach. For the first few months in Virginia, I was put up in a temporary spot called the Navy Gateway. It was basically a hotel setup, one twin bed per unit, pretty nice actually. When I wasn't in class, I was usually out on the pier or hanging with friends, so I didn't spend much time in that room except to crash at night. A few months into school, I got orders to relocate to an older barracks, Building 508. It was one of the oldest buildings on base, but the rooms were laid out differently, way bigger closets, though the carpets were worn and they didn't provide sheets or amenities like at the Gateway. Honestly, I was cool with it. I had 6 months left on base, and I was stoked to have a place I could make my own, like a mini apartment. No more daily cleaning service or mandatory crappy cable from the Gateway. I got a cable company to come out and hook me up with a loaded digital cable and Wi-Fi package. Since some of my buddies had already shipped out to other duty stations, I was spending more time in my room. The ceilings were crazy high, 10 feet, and I had tons of shelf space. The only downside, the overhead fan and light didn't work with the wireless remote by the door. Each unit in 508 had 2 bedrooms with locking doors that shared a common area: bathroom, fridge, cabinets, and a small sink. When I moved in, I noticed the door to the other bedroom, 328A, was closed. I did a quick check of the unit and found a wet towel hanging on the rack and some moisture around the sink. Then I heard a voice coming from the other bathroom. I was bummed, thinking I'd have to share the unit. So I spent the rest of the afternoon hauling my stuff from the Gateway to 508. To make things easier, I propped my bedroom door open with a deadbolt since I didn't want to keep fishing out my key card while carrying armfuls of bags. On my second trip back, I noticed a strong whiff of freshly sprayed cologne in the common area. Weird, but I brushed it off. After my 4th trip, though, I came back to find my bedroom door shut, the deadbolt undone, and the door latched. My wallet was still inside, and I was annoyed, thinking my roommate was being a jerk. I had to trek across base to the office that handles key cards. Not exactly close. When I got there, I told the girl at the desk what happened, saying the guy in 328A must have closed my door for some reason. She looked confused and said, "Nobody lives in 328A. I told her that couldn't be right, explaining the towel, the voice, the cologne, all of it. She grabbed a master key, and we walked back to 508 together. When she opened the door to 328A, it was completely empty. Mattress flipped up, drawers pulled out and cleared, just like it was ready for a new resident. Turns out, I really did have the unit to myself. That creeped me out a bit. Fast forward a few weeks, and fall was settling in. I love that crisp, cool air, so I'd crack my window open at night. Sure, it'd get chilly by morning, sometimes down to 58 degrees inside with the heater off, but I loved it. I kept up this habit until one night when it got really cold, like 40 degrees outside and not much warmer in my room. Sometime after midnight, I was startled awake by 3 quick, friendly knocks on my bedroom door. Not the unit's main door, but the one leading to the common area. I figured I'd imagined it, so I waited about 15 seconds. Then it happened again. I got up thinking someone must need to talk to me. I opened the door, nobody there. Right after I closed it, 3 more knocks. I thought maybe it was coming from the hallway, so I checked the peephole through the common area door. Nothing. I went back to my room, looking around for anything loose, creaking, or maybe an animal in the walls. Nada. A minute or 2 passed, and I climbed back into bed. The second I pulled the covers up, 3 more knocks, clear as day, right on my bedroom door. I got up but didn't open it this time, just stared at the door. 10 seconds later, 3 more knocks. Then another set after another 10 seconds. At this point, I wasn't even thinking paranormal. I was just baffled, trying to figure out what could be causing it. The room was freezing from the open window, and as I stood there, I started to shudder, not just from the cold, but from this creeping realization that something weird was going on. The energy in the room felt heavy, and my attitude shifted from, "What the heck is making that noise?" to, "Okay, I don't want to star in a horror movie here." I bolted to the window, slammed it shut, and the knock stopped instantly. The room felt lighter, almost peaceful, like whatever was happening didn't want to mess with me anymore. Over the next few months, I tested it out. Window open. 3 knocks every time. Window closed. Silence. I'd have friends over sometimes, tell them about it, and show them. They'd freak out when the knocks happened. I'm not sure what anyone else would make of it, but I was absolutely convinced something paranormal was going on in that room. When I was about 12, I was staying over at my friend's house one night. He lived in this big old house out in the country, no neighbors around for miles. We were up late, playing Nintendo 64, having a blast. His mom and sister had just left to run to the store to grab a movie, so it was just the 2 of us in the house. Not long after they left, we heard his sister's bedroom door slam hard. Like, hard enough to knock a couple of picture frames off the wall. We looked at each other, cracked up, and figured his sister must have stayed home and was pissed about something. We decided to head downstairs to grab something to eat. As we passed by her room, we noticed the light was on and we could hear the TV blaring. We didn't think much of it, just grabbed some cereal and plopped down in the kitchen. A few minutes later, we heard his mom's car pull into the driveway. In walk his mom and his sister. My friend and I just stared at each other, totally confused. We both said, "We thought you stayed home." We told them about the door slamming, the light, the TV, all of it. We all went upstairs together, and sure enough, the bedroom door was locked, the light was on, and the TV was still going. His mom unlocked the door, and we peeked inside. Nobody was there. The room was completely empty. After that night, weird stuff started happening in the house over the next couple of months. Random noises, things getting misplaced, stuff showing up in spots where nobody left them. It was creepy, but we just kind of brushed it off. Then one night, my friend's dad was at work. He worked nights, so it was just his mom and the kids at home. His mom was chilling on the couch, wrapped up in a blanket, when all of a sudden, something yanked the blanket right off her and dragged it toward the basement. Not like it fell, it was pulled, like it got sucked right under the basement door. Before she could even process what happened, she heard her daughter scream from upstairs. She bolted up there, threw open the door, and found her daughter sitting up in bed, freaking out. The bed had been moved to the middle of the room, and all the pictures on one wall were ripped down, scattered on the floor. His mom didn't hesitate. She grabbed both kids, got them out of the house, and told her husband she was never setting foot in that place again. And she didn't. Not even to pack or help move. Years later, when I was about 19, my friend and I were hanging out, drinking around a campfire with some other buddies. The conversation turned to creepy stories, and my friend and I looked at each other. We hadn't really talked about that house since it all went down. We started telling the group about what happened, and as soon as we mentioned where the house was, everyone got all excited and wanted to check it out. The place had been abandoned for years by then. So the 5 of us piled into a car in the middle of the night and drove out to the house. We found a way in, and honestly, the place wasn't in terrible shape. The paint was peeling, and it had that musty, empty house vibe, but it was mostly intact. We wandered through the whole place, poking around. 3 of us ended up in the basement, which was all cement with 2 rooms split by an open doorway. We were about to head back upstairs when one of our buddies finished his beer and chucked the bottle into the other room. We waited for the crash, but it never came. No sound at all, just silence. That was enough for us. We hightailed it out of there, hearts pounding. I didn't experience much else at that house myself, but it was like a second home to me growing up. My friend's family never talked about what happened there. If anyone brought it up around his mom, she'd either change the subject real quick or just walk away. That place left a mark on them, no question. I'm a mom of 2 girls, and we live out in the country. My husband's a welder, the kind of guy who lights up a room with his charm and has friends coming out of the woodwork. Seriously, he's got buddies stopping by all the time to hang out, and some are close enough that he lets them use the tools in his garage or even crash at our place when he's not around. One late afternoon, he was out, and I heard a car pull into the driveway. Our two dogs went absolutely nuts, barking like crazy at the picture window in the living room. I glanced out and saw a familiar blue blazer, so I figured it was my husband's friend Bob, probably swinging by to borrow something from the garage or wait for my husband to get home. I assumed they'd already talked, no big deal. But the dogs wouldn't quit. They were barking, growling, just losing it, which felt off because they know Bob. Something didn't sit right. I took a closer look out the window and realized the guy lingering near the garage wasn't Bob at all. I'd never seen him before. My gut was telling me to check it out, so I grabbed the dogs and stepped outside to see who this guy was and what he wanted. He was super friendly, said he lived down the street and knew my husband. He started chatting me up, telling me all about how he had to move out of his house because he and his wife were getting divorced. He seemed to know a lot about my husband, even asked about our dog Pepper, who'd passed away a few months earlier. Pepper was a smart, protective dog, could be downright scary if he thought me or the girls were in danger. This guy didn't know Pepper had died, and when I told him, he seemed genuinely sorry, apologizing like he meant it. But here's the thing, my dog Shadow wasn't having it. He wouldn't settle down around this guy, wouldn't let him pet him, and the hair on the back of his neck was standing straight up. Shadow kept letting out these low growls during our conversation, which was weird because he's usually chill. I was confused. This guy seemed so nice, but Shadow's reaction was throwing me off. We kept talking for a bit, and then he asked for my husband's phone number so he could call him. That's when alarm bells went off in my head. If my husband wanted this guy to have his number, he'd have given it to him himself. So I said I'd call my husband right then and there. The guy suddenly looked nervous, which made me uneasy. I dialed my husband in front of him, and when I explained that Jim from down the street was at our house to visit, my husband's voice got dead serious. He told me to tell Jim to get off our property and never come back. That scared the hell out of me, because my husband is never like that. He's the most welcoming guy I know. He said he was on his way home and to make Jim leave now. I couldn't bring myself to be outright rude to the guy after he'd been so polite, so I made up some lame excuse. He backed off quick, like he knew something was up. My husband got home not long after and laid it all out. Jim was a hardcore crack addict who'd been stealing from neighbors' garages. His wife had kicked him out because of it, and he was desperate for cash to feed his habit. He was probably scoping out our garage to see what he could swipe and sizing up whether the dogs would be a problem. My husband second-guessed himself, wondering if he'd been too harsh, but the thought that this guy could have hurt me or the kids made me furious. He seemed so damn nice, and I felt like a total idiot for not seeing through it. Lesson learned, though. If someone I don't know shows up when my husband's not home, I'm calling him right away. No more taking chances. I'm a petite 24-year-old woman, and I live with my boyfriend in a small apartment complex, maybe 30 units, in a pretty safe area. We've been there for almost 2 years, but this story happened back in late October 2017. My designated parking spot is the farthest from the entrance to our complex, right next to a gravel lot out back where visitors or residents without assigned spots park. My boyfriend parks there since we only got one designated space. The spot to the right of mine has been vacant for over a year. A few months before this all went down, I noticed a white van occasionally parking in that empty spot next to me, but not all the time. Usually, it'd be in the back lot or one of the 4 marked visitor spaces. Lately, though, it started parking next to me more often, even when closer spots were wide open. So it was a Sunday, I think, and I'd just gotten back from getting a haircut. I pulled into the parking lot and noticed a charcoal gray sedan with super tinted windows in the vacant spot next to mine. The car was running, which struck me as odd since there were plenty of other designated and visitor spots free, and I'd never seen this car before. As I pulled into my space, the gray car's engine shut off. I'm naturally cautious, and that felt weird. I was listening to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and wanted to finish the song I was on, so I sat there for a bit. Partly because I can't leave a good song unfinished, but mostly because I felt this anxious knot in my stomach like I was being watched or something. I tried to talk myself down, thinking maybe they were just waiting for someone, but I needed a minute to collect myself before getting out. After the song ended, I turned off my car and hurried inside. My boyfriend was waiting, and we were getting ready to head out to his brother's birthday dinner with his family. We were in the apartment for about 20 minutes while I changed clothes. When we walked out to the gravel lot where my boyfriend's car was parked, I noticed the charcoal gray car wasn't next to mine anymore. It was now parked right next to my boyfriend's car, and it was running again. I pointed it out to him, saying how weird it was that they were still there and had moved spots. We were out for a few hours, and I didn't notice the car when we got back. The next day, I had the day off and got in my car to run to the store for groceries. That's when I saw it, a note on my windshield. My hands started shaking as I grabbed it because somehow I just knew it was from the people in that gray car. I was so panicked I could barely read it at first. I started crying, just a pure fear response. I got a panic disorder, so this hit me hard. I won't share the whole thing because parts were, well, really graphic, but here's what I can quote. "Hi, you must not even remember us, but at approximately 5:30 to 2 p.m. on the 29th of October, you pulled up next to us and appeared preoccupied or pensive. We couldn't help but stare. We're serious about pleasing others, and we'll be honored to be the ones to train you. I'm 6 feet 2 inches, 175 pounds, and 25 years old, and she's 5 feet 7 inches, 112 pounds, and 22 years old." Then they went into these super detailed, messed up plans about what they wanted to do with me, stuff I never asked for and definitely didn't want. I managed to pull myself together enough to go get the groceries, then called my boyfriend. He came home during his lunch break, and we emailed the landlord about it. He went back to work, and I spent the rest of the day in shock. I felt so violated. This is my home, it's supposed to be safe, and these strangers just shattered that. I don't judge people for their kinks or whatever, but this was not the way to go about it. They came to my home, painted this disgusting picture involving me, and I didn't want any part of it. It made me feel paranoid, like they could actually try to make that twisted fantasy real. A few days later, I called the police. They came to our apartment. I told them the whole story, and they took the note as evidence. I kept a daily journal and wrote down the exact contents of the note before they took it, so I know the quote above is word for word accurate. They ended up calling the creeps, but I never heard back from the police after that. Weirdly, I never saw that white van that used to park next to me after this whole thing went down. I was surprised the police took it seriously, honestly, because I'd heard stories about them brushing stuff like this off. Their response meant a lot. I changed up my schedule so I get home while it was still light out. For a few weeks, I called my boyfriend or friends every time I walked to or from my car. It was rough sharing this story, and I'm holding back on how deeply it messed with me, but a few things still stand out as strange. It was weird they parked next to me with all those open spaces. Weird that they turned their car off right as I parked. Weird that in the 20 minutes I was inside, they were still in the lot but had moved to my boyfriend's car. Weird that the car was running again. Weird that the van stopped showing up after the police got involved. It was all just off. I looked them up on Facebook using the info they left in the note. Turns out, I had one mutual friend with a guy, an old coworker who was a heroin addict. I blocked and unfriended that coworker immediately. It's been a while since all this happened, but I'm still hypervigilant walking to my car, especially since I get off work late. I trust my gut now when something feels wrong. The creepiest part, aside from their graphic plans, is that they were watching me while I was sitting in my car, trying to calm down. They knew I was uncomfortable and made a point of mentioning it in the note. I'm just glad I reached out for help, grateful for my support system, and so relieved those creeps haven't tried to contact me since. This happened about 6 years ago, when I was 11, I think. It was my first ever overnight stay at a summer camp, and I was pretty pumped about it. This camp was mostly a day camp, but they had this one night each week where kids could stay over if they wanted. I was a super socially awkward kid back then, so I usually steered clear of the overnight stuff, but this time I decided to be brave, have some fun, and give it a shot. Man, did I regret that decision. First, a quick rundown on the camp. It was set up near the shore of this isolated lake with hardly any houses around. The camp took advantage of that and pitched our tents in a small clearing just a few feet from the water, right by a little path. Most of the shoreline was blocked off by thorny underbrush, including where we were camped. So, fast forward to that night. We'd set up our tents, rolled out our sleeping bags, eaten our s'mores, and settled into our sleeping arrangements. I was in a big tent with 3 other boys, just a few feet from the path that cut through the clearing. We were whispering to each other, talking about the best camp activities, crushes, the coolest counselors, typical summer camp stuff. We were just about to say goodnight when we heard this faint hum of a motor coming from the lake. It was weird to hear a motorboat out so late on this small, isolated lake, but at first, we brushed it off as some oddball fishing or something. The noise got louder, though, and then we heard what sounded like drunk people laughing and cackling. At first, it didn't scare me. I just figured it was some folks having late-night summer fun. My tent mates thought the same, so we tried to ignore it. But we started getting nervous when the cackling and chatter went quiet, and then we heard the boat's engine shut off. It sounded like they were quietly getting off at the camp's fishing dock, maybe a couple hundred feet away. For a few minutes, it was dead silent, and that's when we got really freaked out. 2 of my tent mates were completely frozen, while the other one was fidgeting and shaky. Looking back, it doesn't even seem like it should have been that scary, but something about the whole thing just felt wrong. My gut was screaming, and it turns out I was right to trust it. We started hearing slow, careful footsteps creeping along the path. Whoever it was, they were trying hard to be quiet, but in a forest full of sticks, mud, and leaves, you can't help but make noise. We listened as the steps got closer to our campsite at this painfully slow pace. Then, all of a sudden, they stopped, and we heard a grunt. It was clear now. This was one guy, he wasn't supposed to be here, and he was watching us. There's no way he could have known where our campsite was without having scoped us out earlier, maybe from across the lake or something. He started moving again, heading straight for our tent. All of us were lying there, completely still, scared out of our minds but not daring to move a muscle. He walked right up to our tent, so close we could see the silhouette of his legs in the faint moonlight. He stood there for what felt like forever, then put his finger on the tent and dragged it across the fabric. My heart was pounding. He kept going, tracing the entire perimeter of our tent with his finger, pausing for a few seconds afterward. Then he grunted again and slowly moved on to another tent. We were all staring at each other like deer in headlights, too terrified to even whisper. We could hear him moving from tent to tent, walking around each one, and every time he traced a tent, it felt like it took longer than the last. Finally, he walked back up the path, grunted one more time, and then his footsteps sped up, heading back the way he came. A few minutes later, we heard the boat's motor start up again, and the sound faded into the distance. The counselors, believe it or not, slept through the whole thing. When we told them about it the next day, they thought we were making it up to prank them or something. The kids who reported it were pretty much ignored, and I still hold that against the camp to this day. I have no idea what happened to the other people on that boat, where they went, or why this guy came to our campsite in the first place. All I know is that was one of the creepiest nights of my life. When I was around 7 years old, we moved into this big house that was split into 3 apartments. It was painted a light blue, so everyone just called it the Big Blue House. I had a sister who was a year younger, and we lived in the upstairs apartment. Downstairs, there were 2 other apartments. The front one was home to a couple with their teenage son, and my parents knew them really well, had known them for most of their lives actually. They were good people, and we got along great. The third apartment, though, was like a revolving door. People were always moving in and out. I still remember this one tenant who lived there before the guy in this story. She was a woman in her 40s with a 4-year-old daughter. She'd scream at her kid, saying it wasn't her fault her dad left to be with another woman. Even at 7, I knew it was messed up to talk to a little kid like that. The girl would even tell me sometimes, "My dad's with that woman again." It was sad. But this story is about the guy who moved in after they left. He was a single dude, also in his 40s and super friendly. My mom was an addict and would disappear for weeks at a time, so my dad was working full-time to keep things together for us. That meant my sister and I were left alone a lot. Sometimes the teenage son from the front apartment would babysit us, but half the time we were just fending for ourselves. We hung out at the couple's apartment a lot. They were like family, and my parents trusted them completely. We'd all be there, kids and adults, and sometimes they'd invite the guy from the third apartment to come hang out with us. This guy always carried a camera with him. He loved taking pictures of us, and since my sister and I were young girls, we thought it was fun to have our photos taken. He'd snap a ton of pictures of us right in front of the adults and say he'd print them out and give them to us later. He never asked us to go into his apartment or take photos alone, but he was just too friendly. Like he enjoyed taking our pictures a little too much. He also took photos of our older cousin, who was 16 at the time. This went on for about a month. Then, out of nowhere, my dad told me and my sister to never go into that guy's apartment or even talk to him anymore. I was confused, but I overheard the adults talking, and it turns out someone, maybe the landlord or a friend, had gone into his apartment and found something horrifying. He'd been developing our photos, cutting out our faces, and pasting them onto pictures of naked girls. He had these creepy collages plastered all over his walls, just 7-year-old girls' faces on adult bodies. It makes me sick thinking about it. He moved out within days of people finding out. I don't know if the cops were ever called or what happened to him after that. I don't even know if he still has those photos of us somewhere. It's something I'll never forget, and it still creeps me out to this day. If anyone's curious, I could ask my dad for more details, but I've never really brought it up before, so I'm not sure how that'd go. A few years back, I was a 21-year-old woman, just out of college, broke as hell and buried under a mountain of student debt. I was living in Southern California, where rent is so high it feels like you're paying for a penthouse just to crash in a closet. Being young, a little impulsive, and honestly thinking I'd cracked the code on adulting, I decided to live in my car to save money. The weather's mild enough out there to make it work year-round, and I figured it was a genius move, freedom. No landlords, just me and my beat-up hatchback against the world. I decked it out with these bright, psychedelic curtains to cover the windows. They were bold, colorful, and screamed, "Look at me," which, in hindsight, was about the dumbest choice I could have made. But at the time, I thought they were cool, artsy, a little piece of my personality in my mobile home. One night, I pulled into a neighborhood I thought I knew like the back of my hand. It was a quiet, residential area near the beach, just a couple of blocks from where an ex-boyfriend used to live. I'd walked those streets at night tons of times, sometimes with him, sometimes alone, and never felt unsafe. The salty ocean breeze, the sound of waves in the distance, it always felt like a little slice of paradise. I parked on a side street, checked my surroundings like I always did, and went through my routine. I locked all the doors, double-checked the handles, and hung up those eye-catching curtains to block out the world. I plugged in my cheap earplugs to drown out the hum of passing cars, set my phone alarm for the morning, and curled up in the back seat under a pile of blankets. Sleep came fast, the kind of deep, exhausted sleep you fall into when you're young and life feels like a constant hustle. Around 2 a.m., I jolted awake, my heart already racing before I could figure out why. My earplugs had fallen out, as they always did. Those flimsy things were more trouble than they were worth, but I liked that they'd slip out by morning so I could hear my alarm. But right then, something felt wrong. The air in the car was heavy, like the quiet before a storm. Then I heard it, a faint, deliberate scratching noise coming from the passenger side window. It wasn't the wind or a stray branch. It was too rhythmic, too intentional. My stomach twisted into knots. I lay there, frozen in my sleeping bag, eyes wide, trying to make sense of it. The scratching moved, slow and calculated, from the passenger door to the back seat door, right where I was lying. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized I'd left my windows cracked just a sliver for ventilation, a habit I'd never thought twice about until that moment. I didn't dare move. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Was it an animal? Prank? A thief? But the scratching was too precise, like someone was testing the windows, probing for a way in. My car wasn't just a car. It was my home, and those stupid, bright curtains probably screamed to anyone passing by that someone was living in here. I cursed myself for not going with plain black ones. The noise stopped for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then a beam of light sliced through the darkness. A flashlight, sweeping across my windows, searching for a gap in the curtains. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The beam flickered, darting around until it found a tiny slit in the fabric, right where my face was. I was lying at an angle, my head tucked into the corner of the back seat, so I could see the light moving, but whoever was out there couldn't see my eyes. That small mercy was all that kept me from completely losing it. The light lingered, and I could feel the weight of someone's gaze, like they knew I was in there. This wasn't just someone trying to break into a random car. They knew I was inside, alone, vulnerable. The scratching started again, more insistent now, and it sounded like they were trying to wedge something into the crack of the window, maybe to pry at the lock. The gap was too small for them to get anywhere, but the sound alone was enough to make my skin crawl. I pictured a crowbar or a screwdriver scraping against the glass, and my mind went to the worst places, someone trying to get to me, not just my stuff. I kept a baseball bat and a can of mace tucked by the driver's seat, my little security blanket for nights like this. But I was paralyzed, my body refusing to move, my hands trembling under the blankets. I could barely breathe, let alone reach for a weapon. My mind flashed back to a self-defense class I'd taken my last year of college. The instructor had hammered into us that confidence could be your best defense. Act bold, be loud, make them think you're not scared. But in that moment, I felt anything but brave. The flashlight beam kept probing, the scratching grew more frantic, and I knew I had to do something before this got worse. I don't know where I found the courage, but I sucked in a deep breath and let out the loudest, most annoyed yell I could muster. Excuse me. It wasn't exactly the badass one-liner I'd imagined in my head, more like I was yelling at someone for stealing my parking spot or cutting me off in traffic. It sounded ridiculous, echoing in the cramped space of my car, but it was all I had. For a split second, everything went silent. Then, to my immense relief, I heard footsteps, fast, heavy, sprinting away from my car. But the worst part? This guy was laughing as he ran, a low mocking chuckle that sent chills down my spine. It was like this was all a sick game to him, like scaring me half to death was just a fun way to pass the time. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever, clutching my blanket, listening to make sure he was really gone. The laughter faded, the footsteps disappeared, and the night went quiet again. Finally, I forced myself to move. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the bat, but I grabbed it and scrambled over the center console to the driver's seat. I fumbled with the keys, started the car, and peeled out of there, my tires squealing against the pavement. I didn't see anyone, no figure lurking in the shadows, no car following me. I drove straight to a friend's place, my heart still hammering in my chest, and crashed on her couch for the night. The next morning, I went back to the spot in daylight, half expecting to find some sign of what happened, a scratch on the car, a tool left behind, anything. There was nothing, just an empty street. That's when I realized I'd parked 1 block away from a bar, and the incident happened right around closing time, probably when drunk patrons were spilling out onto the streets. That guy was likely some creep who saw my car, saw the curtains, and decided to mess with me. I ditched the psychedelic curtains the next day and got plain black ones, the kind that don't draw attention. Not long after, I gave up car living altogether and moved into an apartment. That night was a wake-up call. Living in my car wasn't the clever, carefree adventure I'd thought it was. I still think about that night sometimes, the way the flashlight beam felt like it was burning into me, the way that laugh lingered in the air. I'm lucky it didn't turn into something worse, but it's left me jumpy, always checking my surroundings, always locking my doors twice. I don't know who that guy was or what he wanted, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never putting myself in that kind of situation again.